And I now want to welcome to the stage Uffe Elbæk. He is a former Minister of Culture and a Member of Parliament here in Denmark. Please come up and join us. And let me also welcome virtually Tom Tugendhat. He's a Conservative Member of Parliament from the UK. Are you here with us? Yes, you are. Wonderful. Also Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Thanks for joining us, both of you. So you're from different countries, you have very different politics, but you have one thing very much in common. China does not like you. So let's talk a little bit about that. Uffe Elbæk, you have been an active supporter of freedom activists in Hong Kong. You invited Ted Hui, a former Hong Kong legislator here to Denmark. He took that occasion to then go into exile in Britain. You're not liked for that.
No, for sure.
And the pro-China government in Hong Kong would like to prosecute you for your part in that. And Tom Tugendhat, you were sanctioned by China after the UK, as well as the EU and the US and Canada, sanctioned China for human rights abuses. So let's talk about this common theme between the two of you. Clearly, the Chinese government was hoping to silence you, to muzzle you, but the fact that you're here indicates that that did not happen. So I'm curious if you think this approach by the Chinese is in fact counterproductive, and that instead of making you shut up, it makes you speak even more loudly about what you perceive as being abuses in China. Tom, why don't I start with you?
Very much for inviting me. First of all, it's a pleasure to be virtually in Denmark. I only wish I were really in Denmark, but there's another reason for that, also emerging from China, but we'll move on from that because that's not what this conversation is about. It's also worth pointing out that I'm sanctioned by the Communist Party of China and the Chinese state. I have done nothing but stand up for the human rights of the Chinese people and defend what I think are essential freedoms, not just guaranteed by Britain or indeed Denmark, but actually guaranteed by Chinese tradition as well. After all, it was P.C. Chang who wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the United Nations, which I think we should all live by. So this is in no way anti-Chinese. It's certainly not. In fact, it's entirely supportive of Chinese citizens and Chinese people in China and around the world. It's critical of a dictatorship which calls itself the Chinese Communist Party.
And Uffe, let me ask you whether you think this is, it's certainly not quieting you. Is it having the opposite effect?
Exactly. I take it as a kind of a badge of honor, to say it very frankly. And I think that in both cases, it has been, the positive side is that now there's a face on the dilemma and the fight. And I've seen that the Danish media and also my colleagues in the parliament over the last couple of years has taken a much more critical approach to understand what we're facing. And again, I have to be honest, for me it has been a kind of a personal journey. 10 years ago, as a minister, I visited China. I thought that, and now it sounds really naive, but at that time, I thought that economic development and democratic development would go hand in hand. And I just have to realize that's not the case. And that's also why an event like this is so extremely important. It's extremely important what the Biden administration now suggests, this global summit. And now Anders Fogh is sitting on the front seat here in the conference room. And I think that this event has been a kind of a Kickstarter of trying to understand both what are we up against, but also the dilemmas, and also trying to put all the small pieces together so we are able to see the big picture. And that's not easy. So this what we're doing now here is important.
You are not the only two parliamentarians to have been sanctioned in some way by the Chinese government or the party. Tom, I'm curious if you think there are things that can be done or should be done that would more effectively insulate parliamentarians from that kind of action.
Well, for many of us, the sanctions don't really have any real effect. I mean, I don't know about Uffe, but I wasn't planning on a holiday in Macau this year, and so
Certainly not
I'm not
now.
sure it's changed. I don't think it's changed an awful lot for me. But let's be honest, it's not really aimed at us. It's aimed at those businesses that do have interests in China and at those people who might otherwise speak out because they're seeing their colleagues or their employees or indeed their suppliers, being pressured and are going to decide not to. And so that's why I think it's particularly important that Uffe and I are not silenced. And I'm very proud to be here with him today. But I also think that the point that Uffe was making is an important one, which is that this is a reminder not just of the abuses that are happening in some parts of the world, but the values that we actually stand for here. Look, the last 5 years have been difficult for many of us in Europe as the discussions between the UK and other countries have, occasionally not been as friendly as they might be. And it's worth reminding ourselves that whatever we're talking about on trade terms or fish or whatever it happens to be, the reality is we share so much. We share so many common values and common interests with our partners across Europe and across the free world, including countries like Japan and South Korea and Australia and so on, that really we have a natural alliance that we must remind ourselves about and build up.
Just to follow up is that Tom is completely correct that I think both Tom and me are sitting in a position where we are quite safe. So I think that it's much more important to understand how China are using the new national security law to silence journalists, science people, activists, etc., etc. Because what was a really happy moment for me was that my colleagues in the parliament, in the Danish parliament, for sure stood up and took my back, and also Katrine Amitsbøl, my MP colleague, and the same was the situation in the European Parliament, and that's what I think that Tom and me agree about is that it's so important that our colleagues are standing up and saying this is not right. We have to defend our colleagues, but I think the big issue is about seeing educators and scientists and journalists and activists starting to shut up because they're afraid of losing jobs, job possibilities, career possibilities, etc.
And are you seeing that businesses and think tanks
for sure. If you're reading some of the international newspapers like Guardian or New York Times, nearly every week you see a new story coming up. Just this, I think it was today, the Guardian had a story where universities in UK, maybe Tom can correct me if I'm wrong, that universities in the UK are saying that educators, teachers should not document their lectures because the student was then maybe scared to be connected with the program. So
is there a cone of silence, Tom, that's descending over business, over academia, over think tanks because of what the Chinese are doing?
Well, there certainly was. I think one of the things that Uffe and I hope I, in a small way, have done, and others have stood up for this as well, different organizations around the world have stood up for this, have demonstrated that this now has a price at home as well. I mean, it was the case that if you were silent on the abuses of the CPC in China, then maybe you'd get away with it, but you'd censor yourself and it didn't have any consequence for you at home. I think what we're beginning to demonstrate, and I think people are beginning to notice, is that self-censorship actually has a price here too. And free people are no longer accepting the idea that they should be silenced by a foreign dictatorship. And quite rightly, why should Britons or Danes or indeed anybody else live by the standards of a dictatorship thousands of miles away? We shouldn't. We should speak out for the values of freedom, intellectual honesty, and indeed innovation that has made our countries prosperous and stable and indeed happy.
Except for this fact, it's projected that by 2028, China is going to be the world's largest economy. It is going to be the big gorilla, maybe. The projections, I believe, still hold for 2028. So do you believe that democracies are going to be willing to compromise their principles in order to placate the Chinese? Uffe, do you want to take that?
It's a difficult question because up till now, and I hope that I'm able to speak freely. it's a conference on democracy, but if I've seen the former governments in Denmark, they have been tiptoeing on eggshells when it comes to China. And of course, the reason, I understand that, but the reason is that it can have a huge effect on the Danish economy if Denmark would be boycotted. But I think that we have to realize that, which is also the whole reason why we're here today, is that we have to stand up and defend democracy, and even if it will have a consequence. And normally we are discussing China only seen from an economic perspective, but we have to understand that China has a very sophisticated strategy on so many levels in the society. It's about science, it's about culture, it's about education, it's about safety, it's about technology. It's not only about doing business in China, it's about that who's going to define how we as a global community are working together. Who's going to define that rules? Is it China or is it an alliance of democracies as we're talking about here? And I hope it will be the second thing, that the democratic countries are able to stand together and dare to say that even if it has consequence, we have to stand up for democracy.
Tom, are you optimistic that that's going to happen?
Yeah, I am. I'm absolutely optimistic, and I'll tell you why. Look, you're right about China's economic growth, and in many ways it's something to celebrate. It is certainly to celebrate that 850 million people have been lifted out of poverty, and I think that's fantastic. And I think that the way so many in the West turned a blind eye to the terrible suffering of the Chinese people in the 60s and 70s is appalling, and I'm very glad that we're no longer doing that. But I'm also positive, because I think if you look at the way in which the international community is coming together over this, if you look at, for example, the G7 now including as extras, as it were, Australia, India, South Korea, and I hope, by the way, many more in the future, we're already talking about half the world's GDP. Now, yeah, China's a big and important economic player, of course it is, but democracies are a much bigger and much more important economic element in the global economy than anything else. And they will only grow, and they'll grow because freedom leads to prosperity. This is an experiment we've tried 100 times in the last 2,000 years. And we know that stable laws, that the ability to keep and hold property that you have earned, the ability to have a predictable future based on a common understanding of principles, which we call the rule of law, is what leads to prosperity. It's what leads to happiness. It's what leads to freedom. So, I am very confident that democracies are well placed for the future. And sure, there are challenges. Of course, there are challenges. But working together, I'm sure we can overcome them.
We heard Anders talk just a few minutes ago about an economic Article 5, whereas if one democracy is attacked from the Chinese with economic sanctions, that the others would respond. Tom, would you support that kind of approach? Would that be effective, do you think?
Well, I think Anders has got a really interesting idea there. And what I'm noticing in Australia, for example, and I pick on Australia only because it's been the most actively targeted by Chinese sanctions recently, is that actually the effect on its economy has been much less than anyone initially predicted. And the reason for that is actually we live in a very globalized world. So if you're not going to buy Australian iron ore, for example, then somebody else will. Because you'll have to buy it off somebody else if you want to build the bridge or build the dam or whatever it is that you want to do. So, sanctions are a tax on the people who put the sanctions on. So sanctions on Australia are a tax on the Chinese people. They're not a tax on the Australian people. And in a globalized world, funnily enough, the Australians are finding alternative markets. I don't know about you, but I've certainly been drinking a bit more Australian wine lately and enjoying it very much. And I hope that we'll all do our bit to support the Australian economy as free citizens, knowing that you support freedom by engaging with it.
I'd like to ask both of you, but Uffe, I'll start with you. If you see the world becoming a bipolar world, where it is democracies versus authoritarian regimes, and how you think that should shape the democracy's foreign policies?
I just had a pause, and then I'm saying what I mean. Right now, my own country has a statement saying that they want a value-based foreign policy, which I'm really happy about. But I also have to say it frankly that I also want to see it not only said by words, but also by action. And I'm really happy that our foreign minister will attend this conference and dare to do it, because it will maybe have consequence to attend a program where there also are representatives by Taiwan. So it's a tricky case, but I hope that my own country and I hope other countries will really understand that now is the time to go from party speeches, dinner speeches, actually also to action. And one of the very positive experience I've had the last year has been the cooperation between parliamentarians across parliaments. And so this is not a political party case. It's not left and right. This goes across political blocs and cross party lines. And for me, it has been an enormous positive experience to work together with IPAC, Interparliamentarian Alliance on China. And through that network, and that's maybe, Tom, you can reflect on that also. Through that network, we have been able actually to put all the small pieces together and start to get the full picture about what we're up against. So IPAC for me has been a very, very positive story the last year.
Tom, you're a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. What should the democracy's foreign policies look like?
Well, you'll forgive me, I hope, as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, my job is to criticise Britain's foreign policy and to try and improve it by being critical. But on this one, I've got to be supportive. Dominic Raab has done absolutely the right thing. The work that Priti Patel has done on giving visas to British nationals overseas, as some Hong Kongers are, has been impressive. The work that Boris Johnson has done as Prime Minister in getting together groups of allies and like-minded friends and working with the Biden team and indeed many others has been really impressive. You know, we are demonstrating that this government, which, as I say, it's my job to criticise, has actually been doing exactly the right things in global leadership. We've got two major events here in the UK this year. We've got the G7 and we've got COP26. And you don't require me to tell you in Copenhagen how important it is to prepare for a COP summit. So you will know that what we're seeing is a determined effort by the UK, our partners in Italy for the COP presidency, and by many others in the G7 and in COP as well. A determined effort to focus on the areas that we need to work together on. And we can do this. Now, we can do this as democracies, and I hope we can do this bringing in those elements of other countries who wish to cooperate and who see the dangers before us, because I think there's a huge opportunity here for the world. I don't think this is about the UK, although the UK would benefit enormously, as would every free country. And I think that the UK is really showing some serious leadership. And I think the work that parliamentarians are doing, I think IPAC's doing it, the China Research Group's doing it, the various other groups are doing it, is really important in helping to inform our colleagues, but also the wider public. You know, we run events in the China Research Group every Tuesday morning, pretty much, where we have speakers who talk about what's going on. And the level of interest we get, not just from parliamentarians, but from business people and just from researchers or just people around the UK, is now enormous. We're getting hundreds of people attending online because this is a major area of interest. So the work of IPAC, the work of many other groups, is really important.
If there is a side meeting to the G7 that incorporates some of the other democracies, what specifically, Tom, would you like to see come out of that meeting? What do you want it to produce?
Well, the key driver has to be building up the understanding of what partnership means in a modern environment. Because we've seen, sadly, ourselves getting played in different ways. We've seen our positions being undermined in various UN bodies, like the International Telecoms Union. We've seen it being threatened in others, like the World Intellectual Property Union. We fought back effectively. And we've demonstrated that actually we don't have to accept standard setting by countries who are trying to reverse the standards of freedom and cooperation that we have over many, many years established, not just in Europe, but actually much wider. You know, the last 70 years in the European Union and indeed in the wider world have not been peaceful and prosperous by accident. They have been so because people before us, in parliaments before ours, have put in the hard work to cooperate, to build up a system of norms and standards that respect and value people, whether they are in the East or the West, the North or the South, and adapted them as the situations change. Now, it's certainly true that they need to adapt again. There's no doubt that we need to update for a globalized world, for an internet world, for any number of different elements of cryptocurrency and environmental challenge. All of these things are true, but we can do it. We can do it if we work together and we set the standards that we need. We can't do it if we allow others to do it in a way that undermines freedom, undermines individual rights, and reverses those achievements.
I have just two follow-up reflection. One is that, for me at least, it's very important to underline when we are criticizing China, we're not criticizing the Chinese people. We are criticizing the government. We're criticizing the government's policy. And I think that, at least for me, I have to remember that, because otherwise I think it should be part of our way of communicating our stand in this case, that this is something not connected with the people, but with the government. I think that it's very important. The second thing is that when Tom said about he's completely sure that we're heading in the right direction, I said, okay, then let's look at a very hot potato on the table coming up, and that's the Winter Olympics in China next year. What are we going to do? Are we going to boycott the Winter Olympics? Would it be a hard boycott or would it be a soft boycott? It's just around the corner time-wise, and that discussion has to step up and speed up. Otherwise, we'll be part of a huge PR show next year in China. And can we do that? Question mark.
We have a lot of questions coming in from the virtual audience, and all of you out there, prepare yours as well. But let me start with this one. Tom, someone asked you, what is the role of governments like Britain in assisting pro-democracy movements in places like Hong Kong?
Well, I think that's an essential question for democracies. What are we actually doing to champion freedoms and individual rights in those areas? And we've got to be honest with ourselves. There are some things we can do and there are some things we can't. We can't intervene domestically, and we shouldn't. But what we can do is we can offer asylum and safety to those who are otherwise threatened. I think this BNO rights that we've offered to Hong Kongers in the UK is really important. I led this charge in 2017, and I'm delighted that Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, and Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, have changed the policy of the UK government to recognise that we have rights, or rather we have obligations under our treaties, including the Sino-British Joint Declaration, to the people of Hong Kong. But actually the truth is we all do. We all in the free world, whether we're in Canada or Australia, whether we're in Japan or in Italy, we have obligations to free peoples, and hosting free news services on the internet, giving asylum to those who are oppressed, is an essential policy that we must all pursue together.
Uffe, we have a question for you. How do you balance interests when working with countries like China, who have common interests on issues like climate change, but challenge Denmark through sanctioning free speech, including your own?
Mm-hmm. No, but that again, that's a paradox. But I think that it will work because China has an interest in also facing its own climate change problems back home. So actually, I think China will still be part of the solution when it comes to climate change. I'm not afraid about that. What I'm afraid about is that China, because they have been able so quickly to change the Hong Kong community to another society, just in 1 year. The next step is Taiwan, and I'm really struggling with how should we deal with that situation as democratic nations. Where do we stand in the Taiwan issue? Because I think it's so heartbreaking to see that a vibrant society as Hong Kong has been able to, just in 1 year, to be something completely different. It goes so fast, and I think China said, okay, we did it in Hong Kong. The next thing, Taiwan.
Tom, another question for you. A big part of our economies depend on China, and the Chinese Communist Party exploits this politically. How could Europe specifically decrease dependence on China?
Well, I'm a big believer in cooperating with free countries around the world, and one of the reasons I'm so in favour of getting an agreement with India, and I was delighted to see Ursula von der Leyen talking about an agreement with India as well. You know, the UK, European Union, and many other countries around the world should be looking at deepening our levels of cooperation. Now, yes, I know there's a very obvious area where we could look again at some areas between ourselves, but this is where I'm very glad that we've got an initial agreement with our European partners, and now we need to build on it. Now we need to find ways in which we can adapt the TCA and change it so that it works better for all of us. Now, I'm looking forward to a different engagement between ourselves, one that changes from the last 5 years into something more positive for the future, because this is about fundamentally the survival of all of us as free peoples, and finding ways in which we can have deals with the United States, with Australia, with Japan, is about defending ourselves and defending our democracies and defending our partnerships. Because the truth is, as Anders will tell you very correctly about NATO, the truth about NATO is it doesn't work because it's just the US. It works because it's all of us woven together as an absolutely tight fabric of partners, and that's what makes the strength. And we can do that too. You know, we did that when we set up the GATT Accords in the 1940s. We built up an alternative to the Comintern. We can do the same today, where we're building up democratic, free partnerships of rules-based states, defending our interests, our prosperity, and our freedom against those who threaten it.
Reminder to those of you in the hall, we'd love your questions, so raise your hand. Oh, we have one right here. Let's get that microphone into you.
So, this Chinese involvement and the increasing power in the world calls very much for a new bipolar world order. So my question is, what is going to be this era's nuclear weapon, so to speak, do you think?
Can you...
Well,
do you want to take... I wanted you to spell out what you meant a little bit by nuclear weapon.
So, because we have a more interconnected world and a new, more sophisticated security dilemma, just hard power is not enough. So it's more, how are we going to solve this bipolar world, and how are we going to challenge China so they're not going to play us anymore with a nuclear weapon?
Which one of you wants to take a stab at that?
It's a tricky question, but a very good question. To say, because sometimes I've been thinking, hey, Uffe, you sound like a Cold War rhetoric. That's not my style, goddammit. But on one hand, I just have to face the problem. The other hand is, how can we lower the conflict level? And who is able to step in and be the moderator? And at the moment, I don't know exactly who's going to take that role. When in the beginning of the conflict in Hong Kong, some of us parliamentarians here in Denmark suggested that maybe we could learn from Norway, the way Norway had played a role as a moderator for example, in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. Could somebody take that global role to moderate it? And at the moment, I don't see a clear who should take that role. I don't know it. But what I'm happy about is that Biden, the new Biden administration, really has come back, that US is back on the international stage. And so that is a positive sign for me. And I hope that something will manifest itself at the global summit, Democratic Summit in the fall, if that's going to happen. But all good ideas are welcome. All good ideas are welcome.
And we have another question in the audience right here.
Thank you. So you talked about the need to deepen cooperation around the world to support democracy. And at the same time, we see the US or the UK slashing your aid budgets. We see this plan to increase sort of a new Marshall Plan for Africa that was sort of trumpeted in the European Union, never really happened. And we see massive Chinese investments in Africa. We've seen with the COVID response, China really rolling out and helping. So what will it take for the European Union and the UK to actually, as you said, Uffe, stop just talking about democracy, but actually rolling out and supporting and building this alliance, in your opinion?
Tom, you want to take that first?
Sure, I'm very happy to. Well, this is where I'm allowed to go back onto my main job, which is criticising the British government, because I think the British government is wrong on the aid cuts. I think it's a mistake, and I think it's a mistake because exactly as the gentleman suggests, the reality is we do need to invest in our partners in Africa and, by the way, around the world. The reality is this isn't just about defending our own interests. It's not just about supporting economic prosperity in other countries. It's also about defending our own interests. Just as the Marshall Plan created a market for the United States, it didn't just rebuild Germany. The truth is, investing in Lagos is about promoting cooperation between, the UK and Nigeria. So I think there's an awful lot we can do. But let's not pretend that it's just the UK or just the European Union. There are many other countries around the world that really need to take this seriously too. The UK still remains one of the biggest aid donors in the world. I think it puts us on about 4th or 5th globally. And I think there are many other countries that could, frankly, step up a bit more. I'm not going to do too many military comparisons, but as Anders will tell you, the 2% target isn't met by everyone in defence terms, and nor is the 0.7 target met by many in aid terms. So I think there's an awful lot that a lot of us can do, reminding ourselves that this isn't just foreign aid, this is actually self-defence.
Tom, isn't this a tough time to make an argument for increased foreign aid when many domestic budgets are stressed dealing with COVID?
Well, as any investor will tell you, counter-cyclical investment is the time when you get the greatest returns. So I would argue very strongly that now is exactly the time to be making those investments, because the truth is we are going to come out of COVID in coming months and maybe in some countries a little bit longer than that. And what we have done in the UK will be replicated around the world. We will have vaccines rolling out. We will have the economies reopening relatively quickly. And there will be an opportunity for a boom. Now, we want that boom to be working in the direction of prosperity and freedom, not in the direction of subservience and control. And the way we do that is by making sure that the pipes are open, that the connections are made, and that the countries know where their friends are.
Uffe?
I think it's a very important question which was raised. And if I should take my more skeptical glasses on, I think that at the moment, at least here in Europe, there is a tendency that the EU member states are withdrawing back to a national state awareness in a situation where we so much need motivation to invest in our international cooperation. And I think that this national conservative wave, which I at least see it, is a danger towards what is needed. We need to invest in our international organization. We need to invest in our EU cooperation. And then we have to understand that China, the way they invest in Africa, both with the 2 new Silk Road projects, but in many different ways are building up infrastructures in harbors, in airports, in railroads, It's like we are sleeping while they're doing it. And the only way we can react to it is to do it in an international cooperation or European cooperation. And I hope that Denmark, my own country, will understand how important the European cooperation is, because that's not, as far as I see it, the case at the moment. And it's not the case, as I see it, in many other EU member states. So thanks for the question.
Thank you all for your questions. We're going to have to leave it there. Uffe
Super.
Elbæk and Tom Tugendhat, thanks so much for joining us. Do appreciate it. And stay tuned. Our next session is coming up in just a moment.